Great. Oh, it is good afternoon. Okay. And thanks again to Richard, Sheila, Richard. Had a great time. I know there were some of us expecting to be in my part of the country or my part of the world at this time this year, but great job. Hopefully at some point we'll bring you all down to Texas, show you a good time. But let's keep our fingers crossed for the future. So I just wanted to sort of dive in, give an update. Richard and I have talked about this as keeping everybody abreast of what ISG is doing, but also making sure that you are aware that I'm here, that we are always looking for more input. We're always looking for more implementers, more vendors to become a part of buildingSMART and give them this forum in which to understand the means, methods, and best practices for supporting IFC in their products, but also how we then go to the user base and talk about these issues. So what's happening in ISG today? As you know, we have meetings twice a year. We just wrapped up our fall meeting a month ago in Glasgow. Richard was there for half a day to observe and see what we do and how we do it. The pictures of the boring meetings are not so great, but we do get together and get to spend some time with a little bit of social hour. Of course, when you're in Glasgow, you can't ignore whiskey. So we did do a distillery tour as a little, team building, team social effort. And I think Rosso mentioned it was one of my better ideas. So we'll see what we can do in Prague and Sofia. So I mentioned this in both Jeju and Barcelona, this idea of my goals as chair of ISG, where we want to move the ISG in the future. And there's these three concepts of agility, engagement, and growth. How can we be more agile in implementing and supporting the standards of whether it's the new version of IFC or it's MVDs, add-on views, new technologies like the BCF, whatever those might be. Engagement. How do we do a better job of providing information to the buildingSMART community itself, but then the public at large? And growth, as I mentioned before, how do we get more vendors involved, see the value of A, being a member of buildingSMART, B, being a member of the ISG, and C, getting certification for their tools, right? buildingSMART works hard to have owners see the value of embracing the buildingSMART open standards as a part of their business. And as that momentum grows, more and more of those owners are going to require that those tools that they want delivering that product are certified. So be aware of that this is going to happen. And what the certification does is it ensures that that data is able to be delivered in the way that they expect. So in that vein, for the 20 years that Rosso has been ahead of the ISG, it's evolved over time. It's kind of ebbed and flowed, and some of the things that we'd like to focus on and going into the future is a list right here. Of course, certification has popped back up again, and our first certification is the reference view. We had 5 early registrants. We have 2 to 3 actively testing files right now. As time goes on, all the vendors are on different schedules, different development schedules. Our business units are all very different. We all have different priorities at different times of the year. So you'll see this ramp up over time. 2x3, we have how many now? 26 applications or so that have certified. So there's things that gain momentum. But this is a good start. And the certification track essentially is a separate track now, right? So Rosso and his team, they take on these issues, they have regular calls, and that way the ISG can focus on other business. We can focus on things like the difference between the reference view and the design transfer view. And Rosso mentioned this on Monday, and we still have work to do. Now, we can't accomplish it all from our perspective in the ISG team or participants. And what's important is for end users to understand the difference between what we were doing and what we were proposing to doing. And the thing that we really are struggling with and have to focus on is this requirement that people wanted, showing the difference that, there's a reference exchange that says, I'm getting data, I'm not trying to transform it into native data, but it's still important to have, it's still important to be complete. I can view it geometrically in a very simple way, but I can see all of the data. But then when I move to something like the design transfer view, I want that next level, right? And I want there to be consistency in translation across all the products. The problem is that in order to get to that editing in a native format, to get that translation, we have to understand more about what those processes are, what are those points in which people are trying to use this translated data. The other thing, and as a part of this, what we have to work on internally is making statements, and we worked through some of this in Glasgow, about what is the intent, what is the purpose of these views that we're certifying on right now. And I think the key thing to understand is that the IFC 2x3 2.0, CV 2.0, that the RV, that the DTV are certification views, right? We know they don't cover everybody's needs across all of global markets, but they are a best common denominator that allows us to say, okay, we can test all of the tools for technical competency and that these things are possible to do. We can't certify all models, right? Users can make mistakes with our products and make terrible models that even using a certified product and it doesn't work. And we're not going to cover all users and all workflows. Okay, so that's where it's important to have these MVD products that build on top of what we've done in the certification process and the certification MVDs. So you can use those as a starting point and say, okay, this was incomplete. It's not anyone's fault. It's just this was the purpose of those views. And as we see on the right-hand side, this idea is, these views right now can cover general workflows of design coordination, of QA, QC of models and data, of quantity takeoff, and then most importantly with design transfer is this idea of design handover. And being aware of this idea is that we're trying to provide an optimal set of information. Not everything, but an optimal set of information in geometric representations of the data points of whatever parameters, so that we can have that accurate translation. But I think the key thing to this, and we talk about this all the time and try to get this across to end users, is that understanding the workflow and the consequences of this is very important. If a user, say an architect who's using Vectorworks, is going to give an architectural model to a structural engineer using Revit, and the purpose is that the structural engineer is then going to take those walls and slabs and columns that the architect may have proposed and turn those into structural elements in Revit. He's going to take ownership of all that. Basically, the architect is giving it up. It's yours. You are now responsible for this. You'll give that information back to me and I'll be able to reference it in, but it's no longer mine. And I think we have to, again, go back and understand these workflows and ownership of data and who's responsible for what when we make these kinds of transfers. So things that we're faced with, for very simple objects, columns, walls, things of a pretty general, generic nature. They have a regular footprint. They have a regular extrusion. We do them today. Tools like Revit and ArchiCAD do this day in, day out. DDS. Some tools limit the number of objects that they currently translate for different workflows. But then there's more moderately complex objects, roofs, curtain walls, doors, windows. They generally work, but they may not be as parametrically editable as you would hope for. But then the thing that we're sticking on right now, the thing that's really complex, is that there's some objects that people really want and don't understand how difficult they are to translate. So some examples. Roof is relatively simple. Even though it's a complex aggregate, it's made up of a lot of members, a lot of pieces that are relatively simple, and we can all define, and we all have a generally good capability of translating. Same thing with curtain wall. Curtain wall looks like a complex system, but it's really just a system of simpler parts. Where it begins to break down is when we look at something like IFC stair. The problem with stair and it is not that we can't show the stair, but if you look further into something like stair flight, it's not broken down into parts. It's an explicit body representation of everything, the treads, the risers, the stringers, whatever their configurations may be. Now, knowing the way that Revit puts together stairs and knowing the way that Vectorworks puts together stairs, I can't make a parametric stair go from one side to the other. It's impossible. So understanding that, we can say, okay, what should we expect for the first version, and then, what should we then ask that changes that need to be made in IFC 5 or IFC 6 or whatever. But that's also based on end users. What do they need? What kind of granularity is necessary for those more complex objects? And this idea of curves, right? NURBS is introduced in IFC 5. We have applications that don't even support NURBS. Okay? Is the pressure on them then to begin to support these types of features so that they can accurately represent it with the most efficient geometric representation possible? Or do we simply say, hey, if you're trying to do design transfer view, from some products, you're just not going to get the curve geometry, especially the more complex stuff. So then this is, as I said before, this idea of trying to find the best common denominators. So the targets that we have to shoot for and get everybody to understand and managing user expectations is that for Design Transfer View 1.0, which we'll try to start certifying on next year, is that we're going to get 3 out of 5 stars. This is what we're shooting for. There's things that are going to be missing that are going to have to be simplified. Sorry, folks. That's just the way it's going to be. But then as we build capabilities into the specification and we give some of these tools more time, then that second version becomes more complete. And we have greater capability. And then with the third version, whether it's based on IFC 5 or it's based on IFC 6, I don't know yet. That's a little too far in the future right now to determine. But as long as we're all on the same page with that, I think it's completely possible to do. At the same time, what we're trying to do now, what we need to do, and what Thomas introduced to us in Glasgow was this idea of a product development strategy. And the ISG has to be involved. We have the technical expertise of our own products to say, well, this is what we're capable of doing, or these are the things that we see as possibilities. And we push each other. It's a very competitive environment. Some tools do some things better than others. But at the same time, we're not going to decide solely on our own what that roadmap looks like and what it should be, nor should we, right? We have one perspective. We have a valuable perspective, but we have one perspective. And at least we can push that and coordinate our internal developments with the IFC development, but also what the user needs are. There's an idea we've sort of been toying with, and we've been trying to figure out what's really the best way to do this, because there has been an effort to do these hackathons with BCF. So the question is why don't we start doing this at the ISG level? Pick a topic, and we schedule our meetings a year and a half out ahead of time, and say for this meeting, we want everybody who's interested to start prototyping X or Y. Can we do that? And then that way start to have sort of this more rapid development kind of process go on, and be open about it and let people know that these things are happening, and gather that excitement about the things that we're trying to do. And that includes things like MVD-XML along with BCF, this concept of the IFC toolkit, which Greg will talk about. And then as IFC, the base specification matures, what are the things that we can do with that? Also, we need to do a better job of giving responses to a lot of the projects that are happening in the different areas that we saw this week, right? So in the different rooms, the project proposal, the activity proposals, even as they're proposals, even before they start out as projects, it's really a good idea to come to us and ask us our opinions, right? Now, we aren't all going to talk with one voice, but you should be able to come to the ISG and say, well, what do you guys think? What can you do? Here's what we want to do. Who's interested in being involved in this project to help us prototype things when we get to that point? So we want to be involved. We don't want to just sit on the back and on our heels and say, okay, well, we're not going to do anything until you lay it out there in front of us when it's done. Because by then it's already too late. You're saying, well, now we need it, as soon as possible. We want it tomorrow. That won't happen. You'll get it a year from now, because that's a lot of times what happens with the development schedule of these larger vendors. If we get more smaller vendors involved that can push the conversation and push our overall development, then we could see more traction. But we have to have notice ahead of time. I try to do that when I come to these meetings, take those notes back to the ISG and say, hey, guys, this is coming. This is coming. But we need to do a better job of having input, having this communication between the group overall, the larger body of buildingSMART, and the things that we do within our group. And then finally, this idea of user interaction feedback. So on a regular basis, with every meeting, we try to have users come and talk to us directly, just like we had the stories this morning and just like we had on Monday. So that the people who are in the ISG room, those who are come from the vendors as either product development managers or the engineers themselves, can see firsthand, unfiltered, what's going on. They can be very proud of their work, or they can go, I guess we need a little more work to do. Or we can figure out who we need to talk to in those workflows and say, we can fix this. You and I can fix this. So in moving forward, one of the big things, I've talked about this for a year now, and I keep talking about it. We need more participants. I want to see, ideally, every chapter have their own ISG that feeds back into the international ISG. I want us, as the international ISG, to feed information back out to all the different markets and chapters, whether it's Korea or China or Japan or Norway or the United States or whatever it may be, is that there are vendors. There's, I think the count now I have is 185 vendors with 240 tools all over the world, that can benefit from sharing this information. But it requires your interest, you coming to us and engaging. I'm one little guy. I can only go so many places at once. So we're trying to give you access. We're opening the door and saying, come join us. Don't worry about language. I have personal resources that allow me to engage anybody anywhere in the world through my distribution network. And they're more than happy to help. Other distributors, whether it's Autodesk or Celebri or Bentley, whoever it may be, we all have resources that can help with that communication method. But we need to get it established and we need to move forward now. So thank you. Contact me, give me your card, send me an email, go to the website. Well, we've been talking about this idea is we want to revamp those communication resources too to make it easier to have these communications and move that forward. And hopefully by Paris, we'll have something moving forward we can really get people excited about. But we still have the ability to communicate now and we want to get it started soon. Thank you.
A quick question for Jeffrey while we're just changing over the slide. And then we'll probably do more questions at the end of Jeffrey and Thomas and Greg's viewpoint. Yes, Sigve.
I really like the initiative of having local ISGs. We are trying to, we have some community and we want to get it stronger and connect it better to the international ISG activities. Do you have a plan for coordinating when we want to start this? So.
Yeah, just email me. And I think what I need is somebody to sort of start from the outside and say, we want to do this and then work on it. And we had sort of the discussion last night. A part of it is communication channels. But I think for me, the biggest step is just desire and intent. I mean, that's always the hardest step. Right? We want to do this. Okay, you want to do this, let's start talking and we'll get it to work. You guys are strong. As we saw in the Oslo meeting, there were a lot of local developers who showed up. I know in the Japanese chapter, there are a lot of local developers that are very engaged at that chapter level, but the communication between us and that chapter could be stronger. So let's fix that. You know, the Chinese chapter and that marketplace, there's all kinds of vendors, but we need to start establishing those communications so everybody can benefit from it. Any others?
Please. Ask Jeffrey a question.
So one of the other issues is as we grow the ISG, our model may have to change. Our meeting model, currently what happens is that there's always one vendor who acts as the host. In the case of Norway, the chapter hosted. And ideally, we would like to move to that model where we rotate around to the different parts of the world. We're able to gather local vendors who can't make all the international meetings, but they're at least there. And then have that experience, and then we, around the calendar year. So think about that too.